Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here today and welcome to our Advocacy Talks session for September. It's great to have you with us today. My name is Lorna Fitzpatrick. I am the Advocacy and Engagement Manager here in NCBI. I've recently joined the team, so I'm working alongside Aoife and Liz. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to meet with you today and do a quick introduction. And as always, if there's ever any questions or comments or anything like that, don't ever hesitate to reach out to either myself, Aoife or Liz. We're always here to help in any way we can. But moving on to the reason we're here today. Oh, and there's a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if anybody can hear that. Brilliant. I think we've got that there. The technological solutions, we're coming to them after so long online. But I'm going to introduce our speaker today. So we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Niall O'Muiri, who is a retired mental health nurse. And as a board member of Wexford Mental Health Association, he delivers mental health awareness talks and workshops to both secondary schools and community groups in Wexford. He's also a RAP facilitator, which is a two-day self-help mental health workshop, which explores the development of a wellness recovery plan. And Niall currently facilitates a six-week mental health awareness workshop for transition year students titled The Fine Art of Surfing, Your Mental Health and Wellbeing. And that's what we're going to look at today, along with a living skills workshop for fifth year students in the FCJ secondary school in Bunclody. So if there's anybody from Wexford on the call, some of these places will sound familiar to you. Niall is an author of two plays on the subject of mental health, A Face in the Crowd, which was seen by over 1,000 County Wexford TY students in 2019 alone. His other play, The Glass Asylum, was recently sold out in both Wexford Arts Centre and the Presentation Centre in Enniscorthy. The Glass Asylum was the Bunclody/Kilmichael drama group's entry on the 2019 All-Ireland one-act drama festival circuit. His most recent play was written as part of a TY drama workshop titled Turn Back Time, which deals with the impact of online bullying and suicide on young people. So Niall is going to go through his presentation with us today for in around 30 minutes or so, and towards the end then we'll go through any questions that anybody may have. So if you do have any questions as we're running through the session today, please do log them in the questions box and we'll come to them at the end. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Niall. Thanks so much.
Okay, listen, thanks a million, and thanks a million to NCBI for the invite. I'm flattered to be asked to come along to this. Now, after 30 minutes, you'll be probably saying, why the hell did they ask your man over? Sure, he could say anything. But as Lorna said, my name is Niall, and I've spent 35 years working as a psychiatric nurse, and the last 15, 20 years of my career spent as a community mental health nurse. And my job at the time was to support families and support people who may at some stage of their lives have come in contact with the mental health services. Some come for long periods of time in their lives and some come for very short periods. And then in the last 5 years since I retired, I was at a loose end and looking out the window bored stiff and thought I had a lot more to give. I got involved with Wexford Mental Health Association and kind of took on the role as their education officer, as Lorna said, going into schools and doing this kind of thing, and the whole thing is just to reach out to somebody. Most of you will have heard a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about, but one or two of you might pick on something and say, oh my God, that's what I need, or that's what that will support me. And the theme of today's talk, I call it the fine art of surfing. Now, for the older ones there, if there's anyone 59 or 60, there was a Boomtown Rats album called The Fine Art of Surfing back in the 70s or 80s or whatever it is. The rest of you are wondering who the hell are the Boomtown Rats, but that's another story. And I like the title simply because isn't life like surfing, and your well-being is like surfing. You get up on a surfboard, you get a belt of a wave, you get the wind knocked out of you, and then you get back up again. And just every now and then you might catch a wave. And that rush and that feeling of well-being, and it just happens now and then, and every other time we're just struggling to get by. So the idea of the talk today, and the theme of it is, it takes practice. When you consider all we lost during COVID, all the talk is about our physical health, all the talking, the COVID regulations, 1.5 meters, you couldn't go and meet your friends, you couldn't go, all that kind of thing. We're all very good at looking after our physical health. But when it comes to what's going on inside your head, nobody knows. The person sitting beside you right now, this moment when you go to work, or you never know what's going on inside their head. And when it comes to your mental health and all that kind of thing, you know, it's often not till we're in a crisis that we suddenly realise, oh my God, I need some help. And you know yourself, when you're stressed and in a crisis, that's not the time to make a decision. The time is now, when you attend this talk and you're feeling quite well about life, is to reflect on the things you put in place in your life to maintain your well-being. You know, and so the idea is today just to think a little bit about your well-being. We're thinking about it every day when we wake up in the morning. You assess your mood, reflect on your daily routine and the things you do to maintain that feeling of wellness. You know, we don't think about that often, that actually meeting your friend for coffee is a really good thing to do, and that makes me feel good, and it takes your mind away from other little worries. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of seeking support and asking for help in times of stress and mental health difficulties, because no problem lasts forever. If all of you think back, I don't know the age profile of the people listening, but if you think back in your life, there's always good times followed by bad times, but there's always good times ahead. No problem. The stuff that upsets you when you're 15, 16 and 17, I can guarantee you will not be upsetting you when you're 20, 21, 22, because there'll be different stuff upsetting you. And an old fella like me, the stuff that was upsetting me when I was in my 20s and 30s, geez, I'm 60 now, I don't give a fiddler's fart about that stuff. But there's other stuff on my mind and I have to deal with that. And then the reassuring thing is recovery happens. There's always a better day ahead. No matter what, you break your leg or you're feeling depressed, things do get better if you look for help and if you ask for help. So the talk lasts about 30 minutes or so. Now listen, don't worry about the slides or trying to read or whatever's on them. You know, I use these just as props for myself. If there's anything important in it, you know, I'll describe it to you and whatever it is. But for positive health, I have to take a gasp of water. My nerves are shot doing this. For positive health, what do we need for positive health? Well, actually, there's three very simple things, and it's a very simple mantra. It's somewhere to live, someone to love, and something to do. And that's very simple, isn't it? Because somewhere to live is somewhere safe. When you come home in the evening and you close your door in the evening, that you feel safe there. You can imagine what it's like for somebody who's homeless. And it's all the talk in the news these days about homelessness and that. And there was an interview some time ago on RTE, and they interviewed a 16-year-old girl. Now, when they talk about homeless people, there's very few children sleeping on the streets in Dublin or in Cork or whatever it is. They're all in some kind of supportive accommodation. But this young girl, herself and her family, they were living in a hotel room somewhere in Dublin, and she was going to school and she had the school uniform like every other teenage kid. And she spoke about the embarrassment and the stigma attached to she would never tell anybody where she lived. She would never, and when all her teenage friends were deciding we'll go to the cinema tonight or we were going out, she'd always arrange to meet them somewhere other than outside where she was living, because she was mortified. And she lived with the constant fear that she may be moved every 6 months or whatever from that accommodation, which meant that at one stage they were moved from one side of the city to the other. And in order to maintain a normal life for her, she had to get 2 buses across the city and link in with her friends. And still they'd always, you know, she'd go up to their houses after school or whatever and go for these sleepovers and whatever, but she never had a place. And that caused huge stress on her well-being. And someone to love is a very simple thing. It's someone to love you and for you to love somebody that you can trust, that takes you for what you are. I see my daughters and all that, all on Facebook and TikTok and I do some work in schools, and you get kids to put up their hands, how many friends have you? And the kids are saying, I have 100 friends, I have 150 friends on Facebook. So we know that's all rubbish. If you can go through life with 3 or 4 good friends that are there for you in the good days and bad days, you're really, really lucky. And that's what we'll talk about later on, about supports in your life, people that you can turn to. And then there's something to do. If you look at all we lost during COVID, you know, all that sense of that we were driven into isolation, where we were told, you know, we couldn't go visit our friends, we couldn't go to our groups and that, you know, and the impact that has had on people. Some psychologists say that strong family ties and social contacts reduce the risk of illness. While people who isolate themselves or live alone, there's a higher percentage of those people presenting with both physical and mental illness in their lives. So we all need something to get out of bed for in the morning. We all need something to do every day in our lives and something to look forward to. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So, but despite all that, and despite our best efforts, sometimes we do crash. Sometimes we do fall down. You know, 1 in 4 school students coming into school gates every day struggle with their well-being. You know, there's something either going on in their lives at home, there's something going on in the school, or there's something going on in their heads that they can't get a handle on, you know, that they struggle with. 1 in 4 students, and it's the most difficult time of their lives, isn't it? The teenage years. All of us remember the knot in our stomach we had because everything was a new experience. Our bodies were changing, our minds were changing, and our ability and our relationships were changing all the time. So it was really hard time of the year. So that's why that stat is there, 1 in 4. But 1 in 4 adults at some stage in their lives will also struggle with their well-being. Will have a significant mental health crisis in their lives where they may at some stage need support and need help. And it's important that you think about that now, that in the event of it happening, where do I go and who do I turn to? The World Health Organization recently announced that by 2030, depression is going to be the #1 mental health crisis worldwide. Recently, during the COVID thing, the Irish government, the HSE, released figures saying that the amount of people presenting in their GP practice looking for antidepressants has quadrupled. And it's simply because of that isolation and that withdrawal and that pulling away from social contacts. They say that there's a tsunami of mental health crisis coming down the line post-COVID as we all struggle with the fallout from it. So this is a slide here and it gives you the early warning signs to either depression or something breaking down. Because when experts talk about depression, we all think depression is just feeling sad and not up to it and not feeling like going out that day. But depression is often categorized in different ways. Like there's a postpartum depression which affects women straight after childbirth, where they find it really hard to bond with the child, where they find it hard to get a handle on the whole thing of rearing a child and bringing a child into the world. You know, there's a thing called SAD, a type of depression called SAD, which is a mild to moderate depression, a seasonal affective disorder. I used to work with a psychiatrist and he was well aware of it in himself. His mood used to dip coming into autumn and winter, and then it used to pick up in spring. And he was very conscious of it, so he was able to put things in place that protected him against that. You know, and it's usually a mild to moderate depression. There is bipolar depression, which is a significant mental illness where your mood fluctuates and drops into deep depression. And you certainly do need massive support with that. Within the mental health services at times. Then there's a reactive depression, which is where you're reacting to a crisis in your life. You're reacting to a loss. You're reacting to something happening that throws you. You know, and it's usually a bereavement. It's usually a loss. Could be a loss of a job. Could be a broken relationship. Whatever it is. But you're able to put your finger on it. You're able to say, that's why I'm feeling like this. And when you're able to put your finger on it, you're at least able to do something about it. And then there's a type of depression called endogenous depression. And that's a hidden depression, and it sneaks in on you, and it can happen to any one of us, and you can look at people and you think, why would he be depressed? He has everything. He has a good relationship, he has a good job and all that, but it is a depression that comes from within, and you find it really hard to get a handle on it. And it's a hidden disease, and it's very easy to put up a front towards it. I hosted a stand. Those gaps are me taking a slop of water and dribbling it all down my chin. This is the great thing about Zoom, isn't it? I have a really nice shirt on me and I have a pair of shorts down below, but you can't see that. But anyway, I hosted a stand a few years ago at a farm safety event. And it was full of all these, you know, they have people from the Health and Safety Authority and all there saying that, look, you need to tie up your hair if you're working with a machine, because if your hair got caught in the machine, you get your scalp ripped off. And it was all about this and about farm deaths with children and all that thing. And during it, the farm owner who was hosting it got up and he said, no, I'm going to talk about well-being and mental health because it's not a thing we talk about as farmers. And I thought they were going to get some expert up there, or a half-baked expert like myself chancing their arm. But the man said, I'm going to tell you about my own well-being. And he said that in the last 2 to 3 years, he woke up one morning and gradually he had this feeling that he didn't want to be there anymore. And he didn't know where the thought came from. He thought because he had everything, he loved farming, he had a lovely wife, he had kids in their teens and going to college and all that. But he said every day he woke up and he had this feeling of dread in his stomach, and he had this feeling of dread in his head, where this thought, the suicidal thought, kept going around in his head. And yet he carried on farming, but when he went into the barn, he saw the beam where he was going to put a rope around it. And every Sunday evening, as the time went, every Sunday evening, he insisted on bringing his daughter back to the bus in New Ross so she could go on to college in Limerick. And the daughter used to be saying, Dad, don't worry about it. I'll get a lift off Mary down the road. And the son used to say, no, I'll drop her in. And he said, no, I'll do that. And he said the reason he did that is because he didn't think he was going to be around the following Sunday. That's how disturbing the thought came. And he woke up one morning and he said, I have two choices here. I'm either going to go out to that shed and do something that will have devastating consequences on the whole family, or I'm going to ask for help. So he went up to his GP. And your GP looks after 90% of mental health issues. No matter what, you go to him, he will treat you there and then, or he'll refer you on to appropriate services. But he went up to the GP, and the GP said, geez, I haven't seen you, Paddy, in 10 years. He said, here, sure, I might as well give you the full service. So he did his blood pressure and taking his bloods and all that and listening to his breathing. And in the middle of it, he said to him, so Paddy, is there anything else going on in your life? And Paddy thought to himself, he said, well, I'll either tell him this or I don't tell him, but if I don't tell him, I'm going to wake up again tomorrow morning with the same thoughts. So he said, listen, doctor, I have these thoughts going on in my head that are telling me to kill myself, telling me that life isn't worth living. And the doctor looked him straight in the eye and he said, you're depressed and we can help you with that. And as soon as he said it, as soon as he put a name on it, a great burden lifted from him, because it's like a problem halved is a problem shared. And by simply saying it, and by simply saying the word suicide, and I'll come to it later on, he said just a great relief, and he walked out a lighter man. Now, he said things didn't change there and then at that moment, but the fact that somebody understood it and recognised it and was able to put a name on it, he said the journey back started and there was light at the end of the tunnel for the first time in 2 years. And the funny thing about all this is about asking for help and telling somebody about it. Research shows that more women suffer from depression than men, and yet more men kill themselves in this country than women. And why is that? My theory is that women talk about it. Women are more inclined to talk to their friends, their female friends, or to their parents, or to their colleagues, or to their sisters. While men just bottle it up, we bottle it up and we bottle it up, and we don't talk about anything. And we don't bottle up till we explode. And the explosion can lead to devastating consequences for family and friends and those who do love you. So the key message, if you get nothing else from this talk today, is if there's something bugging you and chewing away at you, just say it to somebody, say it to anybody, and I guarantee you turn the corner. But the key thing to look out for is social withdrawal. It's the first sign of depression, that a person is pulling away. You know, you're going every day into whatever, you go to work or you go to your NCBI centres or wherever it is, and suddenly somebody is missing 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Now the chances are they're sitting at home, they're having their crack and they're eating sugar and spice, coffee cakes and whatever it is, you know, but the chances are that there's something happening in their lives and they're beginning to pull away. And you notice it in yourself, a loss of interest. You know, when you're down in the dumps and things are getting you down a little bit, you're no longer interested in, you know, the matches on telly. I won't watch that tonight, I'll turn off the telly. A feeling of low energy where the impact of an early depression has on your mood and your energy levels. You know, I don't feel like going for a walk. You start skipping these things. Sleep disturbance is really, really common in depression. You know, either early morning waking or really difficult falling off to sleep, or waking in the morning with a feeling of dread in the day ahead. Poor concentration. A sense of hopelessness is a really key thing. When you don't see light at the end of the tunnel, you know, when that hole that you're falling into is getting darker and darker, that you don't see, you're not looking forward to anything. You're not looking forward to Christmas. You're not looking forward to COVID ending, and you're getting out there and you're going down to the pub for 15 points, you know, and you're thrown up in your handbag, whatever it is, that sense of hopelessness. It manifests often in physical symptoms. And that's why a good GP will always ask when you go up. And a GP who knows you well, is there anything else you want to tell me? He'll always give you the time. And that's your key, to say it. Because you've nothing to lose by saying it. What have you to lose by saying it? You know, it could be the key thing to turning a corner. A persistent feeling of sadness and the suicidal thoughts that I spoke about. So the key message there is, if you have feelings like that for 2 to 3 weeks, you know, it's not a 1 day or a 2 day thing where you pick up the next day. If it's 2 to 3 weeks consistently, or you notice it in a friend, it's time to do something about it, because an early intervention. Now, this picture I put up here is of a young fella, Shane Carty. He's a Dublin footballer. And he was 18 years old, and he had the world in the palm of his hands. You know, he was really popular in school, fine looking fella, popular with all the women in school. Playing for Dublin under 21s, and at the age of 18 he got called up to the Dublin senior panel just when the Dubs were starting off on that great epic 6 in a row trip. He was a sports star in school, he was really popular, and you know yourself, and at the age of 18 he found himself standing at the, up in the Hogan stand picking up the Sam Maguire with his first All-Ireland medal. And anybody who's ever won an All-Ireland medal at the age of 18, they can shift every young one for the next 10 years up along Sheriff Street. That's how his world was opening up. And he said it himself. I mean, the world was, you know, I had the world in the palm of my hands. And yet when he was standing up there on the Hogan stand and everybody cheering and his family there and all that pride and all that what should have been a great moment, he didn't want to be there. And he didn't know why he didn't want to be there. And he said, I should have been enjoying this. I should have been embracing it. So he said, I could have won an Oscar because I put up a front. I went out with the lads. I went to the schools talking about what it takes to win an All-Ireland and all that kind of thing. But he still didn't want to be there. And 2 weeks later, he was playing for the Dublin under-20s in the Leinster final against Kildare. And he woke up that morning in a flood of tears. And his ma came in and said to him, what's wrong? And he said, Ma, I don't know what's wrong. But I just can't get these thoughts out of my head. And they were in a dilemma as to whether he should play the match. And they just said, look, play the match and we'll get you help after it. And he went and played the match. And there's lovely footage on YouTube about him playing it because he got 1 man of the match. And with 5 minutes to go in the game, he turned to the ref and he said, how long left? And the ref said, there's 3 minutes, don't worry about it, just have this game. And sure, he wasn't worried about the game. He didn't want the game to end because he knew as soon as the whistle went, he'd walk off that pitch and those thoughts would start again. And there were suicidal thoughts again, just chewing away. That life isn't worth living, you'd be better off dead. And it was the same thing. And after the match, his sister, who he had great respect for, his sister Mairead, came and visited and they went for a walk up in Hothead. And he said, look, I have these suicidal thoughts. And she said, look, we'll get you help. And they got him help. And again, it was the key thing, like the farmer, as soon as he told his sister that he had suicidal thoughts, he said it was a burden lifted off him and he started again. And it's amazing, this young fella, and what he's done since then. Like, you can imagine all we would have lost had he taken his life, because he's a remarkable advocate for mental health and well-being. And if you YouTube him, he was interviewed on the Late, he's interviewed on TV3 or whatever it was there recently, and he does great work going around to schools talking about it. And he's back playing, he's 27 now and he's back playing with the Dubs. But he did do a summary thing about it. He's written a book as well about it, but this slide has a few quotes on it, and he said, I was thinking on this man living this idyllic life at such a tender age. I got my hands on my first All-Ireland a week previous, and yet a week later I don't want to be any part of this world. It was a scary process because, as I said, I couldn't make sense of what was going on in my head. The cloudiness was at an all-time high. I don't know if that belch came up over the air there, but I'm after letting an old coleslaw sandwich come up the back of my neck. But he said, I shut up shop for the last year and a half, putting up a poker face, putting up that mask. No one knew what was going on in my world. And that's the key thing, especially with men. We put up this front. Is everything all right? Yeah, everything's all right. You know, and we grunt away the reply. And it wasn't until he told his sister Mairead, I came out publicly with my story, and that was a point, massive weight came off my shoulders, and I could start to live again. And so in that, and in the story about the farmer, it's a hidden illness, and it's really important that we talk about it. And when we talk about well-being and we talk about maintaining our well-being, you know, there is a thing called WRAP. It's a Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And what it is, it was designed by a lady, Mary Ellen Copeland, real American name, but she set up kind of a support group for people who would struggle throughout their lives, or for periods of time in their lives with various different difficulties. You know, some with just difficult relationships, some with addiction problems, some with serious mental health difficulties and that. And from that, they drew up this idea that, what do I do to keep myself well? On top of all the professional support and that they were getting, some of them would have been on medication that supported them, but what other things do you do? And out of it came the concept of a mental health toolbox, a well-being toolbox. And so if I was with you and we were all live, we'd work as a group and we would design our own toolbox, because we all put different things in it, you know. And the thing about us, all of us as people, we're all very poor at being nice to ourselves. We kind of feel guilty if you treat yourself. You know, the way you say, oh, I'm going to have a 99 there and I'm going to sit in the square and watch the world go by. You know, we're very hard at being kind to ourselves. If I asked all of you that 5 things you have to do this week, really important things that you have to do, I can guarantee you most of you would list 4 things that you do for other people. We very rarely put ourselves as a priority. So the idea of the toolbox to maintain your well-being. You know, with Ryanair, you get on an airplane out there in Dublin Airport, and Ryanair, they reverse the airplane out, you know, before you're sitting in your seat, because they're in a hurry to blow that trumpet when they land on the far side in Croatia or somewhere, you know. But one of the announcements they always make is, in the event of the cabin losing pressure, put your own oxygen mask first before you put it on somebody else. And that's what this is about. How can you look after other people if you don't look after your own well-being? And that's what this is. So the idea of the toolbox is, what things do I do every day to maintain my well-being that makes me feel good? And the idea is that when you have your toolbox drawn up, you revert back to that when things are going a little bit skew-ways on you. When you have a bad day, if you're falling out with a friend, well, okay, I've fallen out with a friend, but what else will I do today to make myself feel good? I'll go for a walk. You know, I'll read my book. I'll put on my earphones. You know, whatever it is, little things just for you, little treats. Shane Carty there, the Dublin footballer I was telling you about, like, he spoke about his toolbox, you know, after he got help and support, you know, and he said the training and the exercise was really important for him, and the sense of camaraderie, you know, and the connection with others, really important for him. Listening to music, he did up a playlist of feel-good music that brought him back to a better time, that he remembers being really content and really happy. You know, he had a daily routine of getting up at the same time every day, eating healthy, all those kind of things, all contribute to his well-being. The connection with friends was huge. He told a lovely story about, he was in the Dublin dressing room. You know, you can imagine being 18 in the Dublin dressing room, you know, and he said to Stephen Cluxton sitting beside him. Stephen Cluxton was putting on a suit and going to teach a class. And here was this young fella putting on the school uniform, heading down the other way, going to school. You know, but he spoke about when the news broke about him being in St. Pat's and in hospital and suffering from depression and missing out on the under-21 All-Ireland on account of it, and he was really nervous. We talked about the stigma of mental illness, and this is where the stigma comes in. He was really nervous, wondering what fellas would think, and he came in, he sat in the dressing room, sat in the corner, putting on his gear, and Paul Flynn, one of the leading players at the time, came up, just put the arm on the shoulder and said, "Hey, listen, great to have you back, buddy. Heard you've been through a rough time. If you need anything, give us a shout." And that was it. The fact that it was out there, and that feeling of relief and that feeling of acceptance, you know, meant an awful lot to him. You know, you can never underestimate a random act of kindness. So the idea is, think, what would you put in your toolbox for you? Like, for example, I'm 60 years old, so I'm the far end of Shane Carty's life and all that. So my well-being toolbox would be completely different. And I retired a few years ago, and I was I genuinely at a loose end, you know, because I'd worked, you know, all my life and working with people and that, and I wasn't sure what to do. And there's only so much gardening you can do, you know. And my daughter got me these hens, these old battery hens that were heading for the old the dog factory. You know, she got them, and they came, these baldy old hens with 3 feathers between them and whatever. And I was saying, sure, geez, what am I going to do with these? Sure, I had to go and build an old coop and all that, so I built the coop. And the amazing thing about it was, no matter what my mood was, I still had to get up at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning just to let them out, just to feed them, just to see that they were all right. And so when I was up at that time in the morning, I said, sure, I might as well go for a walk or a run. So then I'd put on my old runners and I'd go up the GAA pitch and I'd do a few laps. And so by 9 o'clock, my day was up and running. So I didn't have time to wallow and to think, oh my God, what will I do? How will I fill the gap in the day? And that's what it is. It's all about having something to fall back on. And I do find that on days when I am at a loose end, or during COVID, when there was none of this kind of stuff going on, doing these talks or voluntary work or whatever, you know, I found that the likes of having to get up in the morning, look after the hens, and then go for a run and a jog was really good for my well-being. Now, I'm not going to keep this much longer, so that's the key thing with the toolbox and that. So, how do I stay well in all of this? This slide here is a wellness guide, and it's got 8 stepping stones to well-being, and we all know them all. And we've heard of them all, but there's a science behind all of this. There's a science behind all these things, and we've heard them. You know, when the Taoiseach got up and telling us all, you know, to look after mental health, look out for one another, and yet they wouldn't let us walk down the road or whatever it is. But these are 8 little stepping stones to well-being. Staying active. It's the simplest of things, but the science behind it says that 30 minutes exercise a day is as effective as a course of antidepressants treating a mild to moderate depression. Because they do say there's a pill for every ill, you know, but really a lot of our well-being is within our own control. So it's a very simple thing, 30 minutes exercise every day, and it can be 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes and whatever, but get out every day in the fresh air. Eating well and sleeping well makes sense, doesn't it? That people who don't eat well people who skip breakfast, people who are eating takeaways and carbohydrate foods, comfort eating and all that has a huge impact on your well-being. A good night's sleep is a huge thing for us all. Getting out in the fresh air during the first lockdown, when we really were serious about and really were restricted, it had a huge impact on everybody's well-being. And the only thing that was left of us was getting out in the fresh air for a walk. I met neighbours that I hadn't seen in a long, long time because we had nothing else to do. And every morning we used to go down. The golf club was closed, so it was great. You were able to walk up around the greens and all that. And I used to meet this old fella coming out the gate every morning. And so every morning you'd first morning say good morning and all that, and then you'd have a little bit of a chat. And then one morning, didn't I say to him, I said, "Gee, it's great to be able to get out." And he said to me, "Sure, isn't it all we have left?" And wasn't it true? Here was this man in his 70s and whatever, and sure, everything was gone on him. The day centre, the pub was gone on him, going down to the day centre for his meals, his relations and all who were living up in Dublin and that couldn't travel down to see him. So all he had was this. And then that little connection with me and him coming in and out the gates. And he would go home, because I was talking to him after about it. He'd go home and he said he could go the whole day without meeting anyone. And that brings us on to connecting with others. The importance of connecting with people and getting involved. As my ma said, my ma's 92, and we were all worried, said, "Now, Ma, I won't be able to visit you now." And she said, "Look, I'd rather die of COVID than die of loneliness." And isn't that the truth? The isolation and the sense of isolation, and the importance of looking out for one another, looking out for your friends there, and not even your friends, other people who attend your centre or work or whatever it is, just keeping an eye out for them. Are you all right? How's things going? Send them an old text. You were missed today in work, or you missed today in school, or whatever it was, And then to begin doing and to getting creative. There's a thing they talk about in psychology and all that, getting into the flow. And what it is it's losing yourself in a moment and a time, whatever it is, whether it's putting your earphones on and listening to music, whether it's going out in the garden and tipping away at something. My friend, one of the girls I used to work with, her dad's a retired guard, and he has a big garden and he has a few hens and a few ducks and that kind of thing, and he spends a lot of time down in the potting shed. And his wife was getting a bit annoyed with him, and she said, "What do you be thinking about down there in the potting shed?" And he looked at her as if she was stupid and said, "Potting. I just think of potting." And that's a man who's in the flow and in the moment, just loses himself in that and tips away at it. And what that does for you is it just relieves you of all the other stuff that's chewing away, eating away at you. They say that depression loves isolation and depression loves loneliness. So the important thing of being creative and losing yourself in things that make you feel good is really important. And then finally, switching off and relaxing is the last one there. The simplest of things, just turning off your devices before you go to bed in the evening. For an hour or two, they say turn off your phones, turn off your laptops, because all that screen stuff is blowing the head off you. And let yourself relax. Give yourself permission to put the feet up, stick the earphones on, listen to a bit of music, and don't be afraid to treat yourself, especially women and that with small kids. They're nearly afraid to relax because there's always something the next day. And I'm going to give you two bonus things of advice that I heard a fella talking about recently. Was laughter. He said, if you know somebody or you sit beside somebody who makes you feel good and knocks a laugh out of you and makes you smile, that has huge beneficial effects for your well-being. Even a false smile. They say if you practice a false smile, the way you see a two-faced so-and-so coming down the corridor and you say, "Look at this bitch giving me a smile," and she doesn't mean it. But actually what is a false smile? The movement of your cheeks shoots little endorphins into your body and that, and it's like getting a little hit. And the other thing is, so if you have somebody who makes you laugh, makes you feel good. I love going into the school, and the class messer contributes hugely to the atmosphere within the class. Once you get a handle on them, once it's not a nut job and you have to ring his parents and expel him, And then the other thing is spirituality. They say that people who are religious or had a handle on religion and that, or a faith, have a better feeling of well-being than people that don't. I take my daughters, for example. They all took early retirement from the Catholic Church as soon as they finished their confirmation. As soon as they got the last tenner off their uncle, that was it. I couldn't get them to mass after that. And sure, not long after, I gave up myself. But it's not about religion. What it is it's about having a feeling of something beyond just you. Like going out for nature, like going out for a walk. It's like this morning, there was a gorgeous day down here in Wexford, and I was up at the local soccer pitch. There's a big pavilion up there, and I was upstairs looking out the window, and the pitches looked immaculate and all that, and Mount Leinster was in the background, and the heather was beginning to turn purple. you know, and it's just a beautiful early autumn scene, and next thing a huge flock of swallows, you know, came dipping and diving, and you just knew they were heading south because they weren't hanging around or picking up the last of the flies, and it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous scene, you know, and they thought that these little birds were all on their way. They were going to tip across through East Cork, down along the English coast, down along the French, all the way to Africa. And it gives you this sense that the world is a very small place, you know, and that this sense of something beyond me, you know, and it was just, it only lasted a few seconds, that thought and that feeling, but it was a feel good, good to be alive moment. So it's really important that we seek those out, and when those moments come, we grab onto them. Okay, and almost finally, I won't keep this much longer, but the whole idea, this is another exercise that you can often do. Oprah Winfrey practices this, so it must be true. You know, you don't need to be Sigmund Freud to come up with this stuff if Oprah is raving on about it. But it is having this sense of gratitude. It takes 66 days. This is all the science around to break or create a new habit. 66 days. So if you're going off cigarettes or whatever it is, or alcohol or whatever it is, they say 66 days when the new habit either becomes a habit or you break the habit. You know, if you go running every day or walking every day, after 66 days, that becomes part of your routine and your life, and you miss it when it's not there. So the idea is that what Oprah talks about and what all these psychologists talk about is that every evening or every morning, you think of 3 things to be grateful for, because it takes 3 positive things in your life to counteract the negative thing, because a negative emotion is way more dominant than a positive emotion. If you think throughout your day, you could have a fairly good day, a fairly ordinary day, nothing too exciting, but nothing too stressful. And then one incident happens that throws your confidence. That's the thing that keeps you awake at night. That's the thing when you come in the door and somebody asks you, well, how was your day? You'll talk about that incident. You won't talk about the fact that you had a laugh early on in the morning, or you had a cup of coffee with a friend, or you saw swallows flying through a field heading to the south of France or whatever on the holidays. You'll always talk about the negative thing. So to counteract the negative thing, when you're lying in bed at night, you go through 3 things. 3 things that you're grateful for. 3 things that you're grateful for today, this moment, at this time. You know, I always think there's a Tommy Tiernan, some people love him, some people hate him, but Tommy Tiernan tells a great story about, you've talked about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, 40 days and 40 nights, and he came out on St. Patrick's Day halfway through it, gasping for a pint. And I always think, when I was talking about the gratitude thing, that Janie, if he had a last of 66 days, Judas would have got tired hanging around and probably gone home, and sure the whole world would have been a completely different world, you know. Anyway, so that's the key thing. That'd be an exercise I'd suggest, that every evening, 3 positive things that happen today. And they could be very small things. There was a woman I looked after a few years ago. She had a young lady, and she suffered terribly from depression. And there was days I called to her house, she'd be in bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the 2 little kids would have been neglected. They'd either have gone off to school on their own. And she used to say on her good days, when talking about the toolbox and going back to your wellbeing toolbox, on her good days, she got up and she brushed her teeth and had a shower, and she knew she was able to go on to the next thing. And she was grateful for those days, you know. So that's that. And finally, just to talk about, get you to reflect on, who are my supporters? You know, who do you turn to? Because we're surrounded by supporters. We've all kinds of people. We have practical supporters. Everybody has the name of a mechanic in their phone. Everybody has the name of a plumber or an electrician. So they're your practical supporters. Then you have your social supporters, who are your friends. They're the people, they don't know everything about you. You don't share everything with them, but you meet them every now and then. You meet them in the centre, you meet them in work, or you meet them, you know, your neighbours or whatever, and you chat to them. You know, and there's a feel-good feeling knowing these people, and they don't have to know everything about you. And then there's your emotional supporter. And that's the key person, you know, that are there for you. That's the person you would turn to at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're standing outside Coppers or something, and you're full to the gills, and you have no money, and you need someone to come and get you. You know, your emotional support is your person who's there for you, who takes you on the good days and the bad days. And then after that, there's your professional supporter. So who's that? That's your GP. Your GP is the #1 person. If you need to access the mental health services, that's the person you go to, because they will refer you on to any other service that you may require. But 90% of the time, he will support you through any crisis that's happening, because that's what they're trained for. And almost finally, just to say, you know, when we talk about suicide, you know, and it is something that we have to talk about, and you throw the word out there, it doesn't put the idea in their heads. When I was growing up, I knew nobody who took their own lives. My 3 daughters went to the local secondary school here, and each of them have had somebody who took their own lives. which is afraid. So you're not sowing the seed in anybody's head there. That seed is already there as an option. And it is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That's what they say. But if you are concerned about a friend, if you take nothing else from this slide, don't be afraid to ask the question. Be very direct and ask, are you having suicidal thoughts? Because the word suicide is the one that bounces out. And you will find that in 90% of people, it's a relief that the word is out there, because they're often afraid to say it themselves, that they're having the thoughts, but they never put a word to it. And don't pussyfoot around it. It's no good asking, you're not going to do something stupid, are you? Because you're stupid and my stupid are two different things. When I was growing up, my ma said, and I was going out in the street, she said, you're not going to do something stupid. Well, my something stupid was getting in a stolen car, or taking illegal drugs or something like that. So you do have to be very blunt and very honest. But genuinely, my experience in doing it is being that it shows somebody that you understand, and it shows somebody that you care. And what have you to lose by asking the question? Because if you don't ask the question, you won't get an answer. And then just to finish really on a lighter note after all that, is there's loads of supports out there. If you're a young person, and teenagers that don't go to GPs generally, you kind of bottle it up. But the great thing about Google, there's an awful lot of rubbish on it. So that's the key thing. Don't start looking up rubbish on Google. But there are supports out there, the likes of the Samaritans, like of Aware, the likes of Bodywise, all these different support groups. And if you phone them in confidence, they will point you in a direction that'll get you support. And the last key message to feel good, in a world where you can be anything, just be kind. You can never underestimate an act of kindness. It'll come back to you 1,000 times. You may never know the effect of just sending a message to somebody. It doesn't have to be your best friend. It can be somebody that you work with or something. Just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. You were missed today. Hope everything is all right. A simple thing like that. And I guarantee you live by that motto of kindness. It'll come back to you 1,000 times throughout your life. So listen, I'm going to leave it there at that. I don't know if I hit anything, or if anyone has any questions, I'll see if I can answer. I certainly am an expert. I spent years as a psychiatric nurse. Somebody once called me a psychiatrist, and I was flattered for about half an hour. And then I said, geez, I better stop bluffing. I better tell her I'm only a nurse. But anyway, and if I can't answer any questions, I'll definitely look it up, and I'll come back to you and try and point you in a direction. Is that okay?
Thanks again, Niall, for joining us today. For anyone listening in, you can contact us by calling 1850 33 43 53 or email campaigns@ncbi.ie. Don't forget to tune in next month to see what advocacy is talking about.